When one thinks of death and chaos, one thing happens to stand out in my mind. Skull Island. An island with many different iterations that are unique in their own way, but one thing tends to stand out. It's not even safe to breathe. Two of the most iconic and the most recent version of Skull Island include Peter Jackson's Skull Island and the MonsterVerse's Skull Island. Two islands that kill nearly everything on it with their terrifying ecosystems. The MonsterVerse has the stronger creatures, but Peter Jackson's has possibly the scariest ecosystem that could ever be dreamed of, or be in your nightmares. Both islands have had their many different organisms and are iconic for their predators, such as the skullcrawlers and Vastatosaurus. But what if they switched places? Today, we answer half of the question, where we drop off a Vastatosaurus on the shores of Skull Island before the events of 1973 before this specific specimen dies to Kong. He will be transported via a portal, and during the transition, all of his injuries sustained will be healed back into peak condition. He is going to need it. The Vastatosaurus will only have one mission: stay alive for as long as possible, but it's all up to fate of how long he makes it. This won't be a gauntlet, but more like a what-if video. Before we begin, let's cover the Vastatosaurus Rex's stats. The V-Rex stands at an estimated 20 feet and a length of 50 feet, while his massive body weighs 20 tons, being one of the biggest dinosaurs in fiction, but somehow still has the speed to be a serious threat, who runs at 25 miles per hour. Now, to specify, we are going to use this V-Rex, being the biggest of the three who attacked Kong in the bowl. An inbred specimen, but a powerful one nonetheless, lasting the longest against Kong in the fight. Now, with the stats all out of the way, let's drop him off. The Vastatosaurus was locked in combat against Kong, but the fight didn't go in his favor in the slightest, getting thrown down into the ground and his jaw getting ripped open. In a desperate attempt to escape for his life, the Vastatosaurus puts all his force in his legs, trying to kick his body up, giving him only a second as his jaw gets ripped open, still alive for the pain. Kong gets ready to dish the final blow until Kong gets sent flying away, the V-Rex rolling around on the ground. But as the Vastatosaurus tried to get up, he began moving, but it was against his will. How is this possible? The Vastatosaurus looks up to see the source of what interrupted the battle, causing Kong to begin getting sucked in with the V-Rex into what looked like a blue-colored sky, but projected into one ball, being the size of them. The two try to resist the pull, dragging onto the ground, but end up getting sucked in where their vision goes blurry. It's time to enter this Skull Island. The Vastatosaurus wakes up in a cold sweat, or hot where he was now, on a tropical beach. He gets up, all of his injuries healed like they never happened. What was going on? He looked around, unfamiliar with his coastal terrain. The Vastatosaurus begins walking around until he suddenly feels a sharp pain in his ankles, looking down to see something trying to grab him. He quickly lifts up his leg, which drags out some sort of crustacean, but huge compared to what he's familiar with. But it's still nothing compared to him. The Vastatosaurus slams its foot down, crushing the crab's arm instantly and turning it over. Being hungry, the Vastatosaurus sniffs the screaming prey and rips open its chest with his jaws, beginning to eat it alive until the loss of blood and his heart getting swallowed kills the crab. But as he's eating, he feels more of these creatures attacking him. It wasn't hurting him, but it was very, very annoying. The V-Rex begins crushing them all, learning that they're hiding in the sand as it begins turning up the terrain, shredding dozens of them in part until the remaining ones hide deep to not get discovered. With a nearly full belly, the Vastatosaurus leaves the beach to find Kong with their unfinished business. But little did he know, he was never going to see him again. He ran into organisms he was somewhat familiar with, like giant insects and serpents, nothing special, and creatures he killed swiftly, making his presence known. He found a riverbed next, very familiar with creatures that could be lurking here from his past experiences, costing one of his fellow pack members to some massive aquatic predators. The Vastatosaurus was thirsty though, so he took a quick sip and kept his eyes on the water. Thankfully, his skepticism paid off. The water is beginning to ripple, and the V-Rex quickly wheeled back as a massive purple crocodilian striked. The Vastatosaurus got ready as the Giga Croc stabilized himself, roaring at him and the Vastatosaurus roaring back. The two charged, the Vastatosaurus biting down, but the Giga Croc managed to leap itself up and bite down on his neck. But the V-Rex could hear the Giga Croc's teeth snapping off from his durability. The Giga Croc shrieked in pain, landing down and retreating into the water, but the Vastatosaurus wasn't done with him just just yet. The V-Rex snapped up its tail and pulled it onto land, ending the Gigatroc by pressing its weight onto its back and nearly splitting it in half. The Vastatosaurus grabbed it into his mouth and walked off, saving this guy for later. After about 10 minutes in, the V-Rex finding plenty of weak and unfamiliar creatures, he found a bamboo forest. The Vastatosaurus walked through, knocking over the bamboo with ease until he stopped, noticing something. His experience has made him not really trust anything around him, and it was certainly paying off at this place. The Vastatosaurus watched as the bamboo began moving. He snapped his head up, seeing an arachnid looming over him. The Vastatosaurus dropped his kill and ran forward, snapping the limbs of the Mother Longlegs and knocking it down as he watched more Mother Longlegs attacking. He braced himself for the attacks and got ready to continue his killing, but ended up not needing it as the limbs of these creatures just bounced off, or snapped. The Vastatosaurus was relieved and continued, the roll switching fast as he killed over 8 Mother Longlegs in his killing spree. He got a taste and found them delicious, noting down to come back here if he ever needed food, and picked up the biggest Mother Longlegs he could find and began moving through the terrain where he entered a plains. The V-Rex looked around, finding almost nothing out here. Weird, usually everyone was packed up together in giant targets, yet he couldn't find a thing, not even a Brontosaurus. The Vastatosaurus continued his path and saw a skull elk munching in a tree line, deciding they weren't worth the kill, but at least he knew there was some life around here. But the V-Rex did need some water, spotting a nearby lake and going to drink in a swampy area. But as he got closer, he noticed a nearby landmass begin moving. The Vastatosaurus stopped to watch as a massive organism emerged from the mossy ground, or maybe it was this ground. The V-Rex was genuinely surprised by its mass and analyzed the skirt buffalo who roared at him to leave, the Vastatosaurus debating if the fight was worth it. The massive horns were making him hesitate, as he had plenty of experience with horned creatures before, and they were far from a free kill. With an enraged roar, the Vastatosaurus took the L and backed off, not wanting his exploration of his terrain to end now. Or so the skirt buffalo thought. The Vastatosaurus watched as it sank back down into the waters, giving him an idea. The Vastatosaurus kept walking away, then sprinted forward as fast as possible, turning to the skirt buffalo, making the skirt buffalo raise its horns to intercept, but it wasn't quick enough to see the Vastatosaurus jumping up into the air and slammed its teeth down onto the skirt buffalo's forehead, crushing its skull and crushing its brain, giving the skirt buffalo a swift death. The Vastatosaurus got out the water and began ripping open its belly, having more than enough food to last. But the scent of his kill had gotten some unwanted attention from other creatures. By the time the sun sets, the Vastatosaurus resting near his kill comfortably, he hears footsteps. He gets up, looking around and hearing animal chatter. The V-Rex roars to issue a challenge to identify the opponents, looking around and defending his kill. The darkness kept them all hidden from his line of sight, but he heard them surrounding him, and he ran in to start killing, slamming his head into whatever he could find, hitting something. He investigated, the Vastatosaurus finding some raptor creature barely breathing from his attack. The Vastatosaurus crushed the death jackal under his claws, and then went after the ones who began surrounding him. The V-Rex got jumped by them, leaping onto his back, which made him thrash around and try to shake them off his body, and were surprisingly easy to kill, getting some of them crushed under his feet as he threw them off. Unknown to the death jackals, the V-Rex was familiar with these creatures, having his own former raptors on his island, that he has killed plenty of. The death jackals kept attacking but made no progress in damaging the Vastatosaurus and were losing more numbers by the minute. So the alpha decided to call the pack off and make a retreat, snatching up some of the skirt buffalo in the chaos and dragging the dead corpses of their allies to consume later. The Vastatosaurus roared, making the death jackal know to never fight this thing again. After making sure they're all gone, the V-Rex returns to his resting spot and lays his eyes shut, the night not bothering him anymore. So far, the Vastatosaurus is confident in his chances of survival, but it has yet to see a mere gaze of this island's fury. When the morning arrives, the V-Rex finishes up the skirt buffalo's body to only a few scraps that weren't very appetizing. This was possibly the most he's ever eaten in one sitting, which was a welcoming change to his foreign land, but he still needed to secure a territory without competition like the death jackals, so he set off out of the swampy area. As he did, he ran into some other creatures like the crimson centipede, an aloe turtle, and a surprisingly fast giant dodo. This was a bird, which the Vastatosaurus has grown to like in his taste on his days from his old home, so he wanted to enjoy this treat, which was running to the coast. The Vastatosaurus followed until it arrived at a cliffside over the ocean. The Vastatosaurus stopped across from it, knowing it had no way to escape, but its footsteps shook the ground, awakening something from underneath. The very ground the giant dodo was standing on suddenly lifted up, causing it to fall into the waters below as a new competitor arrived for a battle. The Vastatosaurus roared, slamming his tail as he saw a mantle claw roar back, not wasting time and the two charging in. The Vastatosaurus bites down on the closest pincer and exerts enough force to snap it off, the mantle claw using the other to stab into the Vastatosaurus' side, which is the first critical hit he's taken on this island, making him bleed. But the V-Rex quickly responds by whipping his tail into the mantle claw, causing the beast to be knocked over and hanging over the cliffside, to which the Vastatosaurus helps to drop and shoves it off, falling into the rocky land below, crushing the mantle claw's armor and killing him. The Vastatosaurus breathes heavily, looking toward the injury on his side. It wouldn't kill him, but it still hurt like hell. The V-Rex walked off after the fight and continued his journey for territory. Thankfully, he didn't run into anything much of a threat to add to his injury other than some small organisms that didn't affect him and stayed out of his way. After a few hours, he found a good place to call home, an area connecting the jungle to the mountaintops. He could see quite a few skir buffaloes and a lot of skull elk, an easy source of food. With a source of food found, all he needed was water and shelter. Near the jungle, there was a river connecting to a swampy area, but the Vastatosaurus didn't exactly trust lake sources after these few days, so he would go to investigate later. The V-Rex went up into the mountains where it was foggy and hard to see, but his scent was enough to locate anything nearby, which came in handy when he smelled a group of creatures in a cavern. The Vastatosaurus went to investigate, enough light from the sun to see inside a dozen of bat-like creatures hanging to sleep. The V-Rex roared, all of them waking up in a frenzy to see who the intruder was in panic, and knocked one out of the air. The Vastatosaurus walked forward as the creature backed up, as he heard some sort of crackling noise. The Vastatosaurus stopped, not sure what to expect until a blinding light hit him. Then a sharp pain shot through his body and shocked his nervous system. The Vastatosaurus roared in pain, just having got hit by a lightning bolt by a psycho vulture. The V-Rex ran off before the others could attack him, his vision blurry and collapsing on the ground several times as his body began failing on him. After an embarrassing amount of falling over and over again, he found an empty cave and rested there where his body was recovering from the severe injuries to his nervous system for a few days. By the time he recovered to the state he could walk, he was starving and needed to eat. Luckily, he knew where there was plenty of food nearby, moving down where the skir buffaloes would be. But when he got down there, not a single soul was in the region. He couldn't smell anything except rotting flesh? He looked around, trying to find the kills or the culprit until he found a trail of blood, deciding to follow it quietly where he heard loud footsteps. He hid behind the rocky terrain, spotting 3 massive monsters ripping apart a pile of dead animals. Dozens of dead creatures that used to live here now were feasted upon by 3 reptiles, the killer chameleons. The Vastatosaurus was smart enough to know a fight he couldn't win, and backed off when seeing just a single one of these creatures were over 10 times his size. Still starving, the V-Rex left to find a new food source. Seeing this territory was useless, he went down the river, knowing most likely there would be something down there easy to kill. The Vastatosaurus was hungry, making him search desperately for anything nearby, but all he saw was plant life and random formations. But with his experience with the skir buffalo and Giga Croc, he could only fear how well a predator could camouflage in this terrain. The V-Rex treaded carefully, spotting land masses he could tell if they were a creature or hiding or not, and smelled life everywhere, making it impossible to determine who was where. When he got too close to some roots, they suddenly lunged for his leg, successfully knocking him down and pulling him to the water. But the Vastatosaurus quickly pulled himself, which dragged his attacker, a massive swamp locust which was now trying to get back into the water but too weak to get in. The Vastatosaurus crushed his body quickly and ripped it apart to eat, eating it without hesitation. But as he did, the Vastatosaurus heard something approaching. He quickly ran forward to evade, dodging the jaws of a massive adult siren jaw. It was a titanic beast that looked like an entire plant mixed with a demon, dwarfing the Vastatosaurus but not fast enough to catch up. The V-Rex backed off, managing to escape the swamps as the siren jaw crawled itself back into the water, not interested in a chase. The entire swamp had erupted into chaos as the siren jaw had stirred up the local wildlife into battles, making the Vastatosaurus worry that a lot of these masked creatures were in their own terrain, so they had an edge, which led to him taking off with his kill in his jaws and rested in a small cave. He was aware that he wasn't the biggest thing on this island, but the last hour really let that settle in. And even size wasn't everything, as he learned that painfully from the electric burns that remained on his chest to teach him a permanent lesson. What he could rule out was swamps, shores, and high altitudes. The best chance he has are jungles and plains to live in. With that goal set in mind, the Vastatosaurus moved out, going toward another foggy area. But this wasn't like the altitudes, but more like intoxicating gas, filled with the scent of death. He found countless skeletons, some small, some big, and some dwarfing his mass like the killer chameleons and Siren Jaw, but yet not a single piece of flesh. The Vastatosaurus Rex guessed this was some battle that has nothing left here, so he continued until he heard something moving, something loud. The Vastatosaurus turned around, not fast enough as something rams into his side, toppling him over and sending him rolling away, nearly breaking his ribcage. The V-Rex looked up to see some sort of two-legged creature having a massive skull and what looked like two massive black eyes. The skull crawler charged, but the Vastatosaurus bit down onto its neck as it went past him because of his dodge, holding it still and pinning him to the ground. But the skull crawler was strong, throwing him off and using its tail to slam his body into the ground, moving him to bite down. The Vastatosaurus quickly kicked the skullcrawler away before it could make contact, giving him enough time to get up as the skullcrawler ran forward. The skullcrawler charged in, but before the Vastatosaurus could bite down, the skullcrawler leaped itself up, slamming its claws into his face. The Vastatosaurus wasn't expecting it and got knocked down, but before the skullcrawler could continue, the Vastatosaurus bit down onto his arm, trying to rip it off, but the skullcrawler quickly backed off, running to the fog to try and hide. The Vastatosaurus got back up, looking around until the skullcrawler charged. The Vastatosaurus backed up, giving the skullcrawler the illusion of victory until the Vastatosaurus jumped forward, using his leaping capability to slam his body into the skullcrawler's head, causing it to get slammed to the ground and giving the V-Rex the perfect chance to rip open its back, slashing it apart as it screamed in pain, screaming for mercy. But it was dead. The Vastatosaurus didn't want to risk an additional battle in case there was more nearby, and there was plenty more coming to investigate, dragging it by the skullcrawler's tail and taking it away to eat somewhere else. He had successfully made it into what looked like a plains, a large red field with grass covering the land for miles. With some time to rest, the V-Rex hid himself and his kill into the tree line and fed, finishing off his kill and giving him some time to recover his strength, only taking a few bruises from his battle. But his resting time was cut short, hearing commotion nearby. The Vastatosaurus left to see a skirt buffalo's body getting ripped open, hearing some of its calls in pain in its last moments of life. Another skullcrawler, but this one was bigger, around his size. Not wanting to risk this fight and already being on full belly, the Vastatosaurus was annoyed, but knew this territory was occupied. He retreated back to his hiding spot and lay down, closing his eyes to sleep. But only a few minutes later, he heard massive footsteps. The Vastatosaurus shot his eyes open, looking forward to see that skullcrawler looking for him. It must have sniffed him out. The skullcrawler was getting closer and closer, the Vastatosaurus running out of time to make a move. After a few seconds, the skullcrawler was only a few feet away. The Vastatosaurus taking the chance and ran forward to bite down, but the skullcrawler moved out of the way just in time and the two exchanged roars, charging in at each other. The skullcrawler won the clash, and her bite shredded into the V-Rex's neck, some of the teeth making it past his durable scales. But the Vastatosaurus was strong enough to withstand it, pushing his neck up, which caused the skullcrawler to lose grip and knock him down. The skullcrawler got ready to strike again, but the Vastatosaurus slammed his head into her own, knocking her away since she wasn't ready for the attack. The skullcrawler got back up, running back in relentlessly and jumping up, the V-Rex moving out of the way of her tail to instead hit him, doing much more damage than the other skullcrawler, this one having small but strong enough rigids to leave a mark on his face. The Vastatosaurus pushed himself forward into the skullcrawler, knocking her over and biting down onto her chest, trying to rip it open, but gave her the perfect opportunity to use her claws to grab his face and toss him into the trees, making him roll away and cut himself on the terrain. The two got back up, shaking off their injuries and running back at each other, the Vastatosaurus getting the chance to bite down the skullcrawler's neck this time and cut it up, but got shaken off and swiped off his feet by her tail. The V-Rex angled himself for his own tail to slap her head away, giving him just enough time to get back up until the skullcrawler leaped up and bit down onto his neck, sinking her claws into his body. The V-Rex couldn't support the weight and fell down onto his legs, trying to shake her off but to no avail, but managing to throw her off by rolling himself over, which nearly flattened her head. The skullcrawler got away, leaping in again, but was stopped by the Vastatosaurus' bite, which caught her head, trying to rip her skull but failed because of her durable body. The skullcrawler pried herself free, but got kicked away and then comboed by his tail, which sent her rolling away. When the skullcrawler looked back, she couldn't see the Vastatosaurus anywhere until the V-Rex had ambushed her side and bit down onto her arm, trying to rip it off, but underestimated the strength. The skullcrawler shook him off and pinned his head down with her other arm, pulling a 180-degree turn with her tail and slithered her tongue across his face, tasting his blood until he got a grab of her tongue and ripped it off, taking a page out of Kong's book, making the Skullcrawler shriek in pain and give him the opportunity to kick her off in her chest, to which put some room. Each clash they had would result in the same thing. One would get the bite, and the other would until they put some distance between each other, and then repeat the process until they both get tired. Both realize this and circle each other, getting closer by every turn, just by a few inches, snarling and roaring at each other. The Skullcrawler ran in after some time, but the Vastatosaurus had a plan. He turned around, running off to give the Skullcrawler chase, who ran after him without any hesitation until they ran into a mat formation. The Skullcrawler thought she had every chance of victory as he was cornered, but the Vastatosaurus angled himself right and ran up, then jumped off the rocks and landed onto the Skullcrawler's back, crushing her spine and then biting down on her neck to rip it off completely, decapitating her. With blood and scars covering his body, the V-Rex panted in exhaustion, barely standing over the body in sight and relief of his victory, but the air suddenly shifted as he felt something of sharp impale him. Before he knew it, he was dead and getting picked up by a massive red-colored bird to be fed to the king of this island, as they had been fighting in the Red Plains, which was the Scarlet Hawk's hunting grounds. The end. Thank you for watching this video if you made it this far, and I hope you enjoyed, as this video took forever to make and create a good story while keeping it realistic. And if you disagree with our outcome, all okay. Everyone is entitled to their own opinions, so it's completely up to you to agree or disagree. If this video does well, I'll probably do V-Rex vs Skullcrawler. I'll probably do it anyway, but whatever. Even if you disagree with the outcome, I'm sure you'll enjoy our other videos, like our versus videos, what ifs, and other could they survive videos. I only have 3 so far, including this one, but there'll be plenty more on the way. And if you guys have any suggestions, be sure to comment down below. And also be sure to check out our artist for this video. Super nice guy and deserves a bunch of recognition. Until next time, stay safe, and goodbye.
I feel like you're